The plane had barely lifted off from the runway, and Jonathan Harris, CEO of Harris Enterprises, was already scanning the cabin with a disapproving gaze. It was a private jet, the kind most could only dream of owning, and yet, as the wheels left the ground, Harris felt an unsettling tension tighten in his chest. It wasn't the turbulence nor the acceleration that made his heart race. It was the realization that despite all his wealth, his power, and his success, nothing ever seemed to be exactly the way he wanted it. The seats in first class were plush, yes, but the light was dimmed in an attempt to evoke relaxation. To Harris, it felt oppressive. The stewardess, who was far too young to be serving a man of his caliber, smiled awkwardly as she adjusted the tray in front of him. The standard first-class amenities, including an extensive drink list and five-course meal, should have been a welcome comfort. Instead, he eyed the menu with disdain, noticing that the offerings were, as usual, the same tired options from every other flight he'd ever been on. Harris hated repetition, loathed the fact that he couldn't escape the mediocrity even while paying the highest prices. When the meal was finally served, his frustrations reached a boiling point. The beef tenderloin, which he had requested medium rare, arrived with an unappetizing gray hue. It had clearly been overcooked, the vegetables wilted and soggy, and the portion was far smaller than what he had come to expect from the lavish culinary delights of the airline. He pressed the call button, his finger tapping insistently as his jaw clenched. The flight attendant arrived, her smile stretched too thin, as if she could already sense the brewing storm. "Is there something wrong, Mr. Harris?" she asked, her voice a practice calm, attempting to mask any hint of concern. "This meal is unacceptable," Harris said bluntly, his voice cool but firm. "I expect better from your airline, especially considering the premium I pay for the service." The attendant nodded, offering an apologetic smile as she suggested that they could remake the dish. Harris sneered at the suggestion. He knew how these things went. Another round of overcooked meat and forgotten vegetables, a perfunctory apology, and a promise to do better next time. The issue wasn't the meal itself, it was the principle. How dare anyone treat him as though he were just another passenger, one of the masses? He had built an empire from scratch, and every decision he made, from business strategies to personal preferences, reflected his uncompromising pursuit of perfection. This minor inconvenience, the cold, poorly prepared meal, was, to Harris, a symbol of the world's general incompetence and laziness, a world that had not earned his respect. He didn't respond when the attendant offered the chance for a replacement meal. Instead, he dismissed her with a flick of his hand, signaling her to move on. She left, but the sting of her words lingered in the air. Harris's grip tightened on his glass, the weight of his anger pressing down on his chest. His thoughts spiraled. How could this happen? How could something as simple as a meal cause such an eruption of frustration within him? But then again, that was what it all came down to, wasn't it? His standards were never about being good enough. They were about being the best, and anything less than that was an affront. As the flight continued, he stewed in silence, his mind racing through an endless loop of irritation and disdain. The plane leveled off, the cabin lights dimmed, and Harris's thoughts became more acute, more focused. His gaze moved to the staff, each one going about their tasks with a mechanical efficiency that grated against him. The stewardesses, the pilots, even the maintenance crew, none of them had the drive he had, the unyielding commitment to excellence that fueled every aspect of his life. He had made a fortune because he demanded more, because he refused to settle for less, and in turn he had created a company built on that very principle. Everything he did, everyone he encountered, was held to the same unbending standard. No exceptions. The flight seemed to drag on forever, but when the plane finally touched down, Harris was ready to make his move. His anger, which had simmered in the background for the duration of the flight, now reached a boiling point. He stood, collected his belongings, and with an air of finality, began walking down the narrow aisle. His footsteps, heavy and deliberate, echoed throughout the cabin, sending ripples of confusion among the flight attendants who exchanged nervous glances. Harris's movements were methodical, as if he had rehearsed this moment in his mind 1,000 times. He wasn't merely angry. He was making a statement. As he reached the cockpit door, he stopped and turned, his eyes locking onto the flight attendant who had previously served him. "I need the captain," he said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. The attendant, now visibly uncomfortable, nodded and made the call. The captain emerged from the cockpit, his face polite, but clearly concerned as he approached Harris. "Mr. Harris, is everything all right?" he asked, trying to mask his unease with a forced smile. "No," Harris replied flatly. "I've had enough of the incompetence on this flight, and I'm not tolerating it anymore. I'm terminating the employment of the entire flight crew, every last one of them." The captain stared at him, his brow furrowing. "Mr. Harris, I don't care," Harris interrupted, his voice cold and authoritative. "If they can't provide the level of service I expect, they shouldn't be working for my airline. They're all fired." The captain, now clearly rattled, stood frozen. He had heard stories of wealthy CEOs acting impulsively, but he had never witnessed such an extreme decision firsthand. "Mr. Harris," the captain began, trying to regain control of the situation, "I understand your frustration, but I've made up my mind." Harris cut him off, his tone final, leaving no room for discussion. "Take it or leave it, but this crew is done." The captain opened his mouth, then closed it again, unsure of how to respond. The rest of the crew, who had been unaware of Harris's growing resentment, now stood in stunned silence. Harris, indifferent to their shock, returned to his seat. His chest swelled with the rush of adrenaline, and for a moment he felt something akin to triumph. He had made his decision, and no one would dare question his authority. But as the plane taxied to the gate, Harris felt a strange unease. His heart still pounded, but the power he felt moments ago was beginning to wear thin. What had he truly accomplished by firing the entire crew over something as trivial as a meal? His empire, which had been built on ambition and perfection, had now driven him to make an impulsive, almost reckless decision. The flight attendants, still in a state of shock, disembarked in silence, and as Harris stood to leave the plane, he couldn't help but wonder if he had made a mistake. The crew would surely talk, their lives now forever altered by the unexpected wrath of a CEO who had demanded perfection and in doing so had lost sight of the bigger picture. The story would continue, of course, but Harris couldn't shake the feeling that the fallout from this decision would ripple far beyond the plane itself. He had made his point, but at what cost? As he walked off the plane, the reality of his actions began to settle in, and he realized that the true consequence of his decisions hadn't even begun yet. Don't miss out on more exclusive content. Subscribe to expect stories for all the latest updates.